I just want to say thank you for having me here this morning. I am so struck by the structure of this congregation, the physical building, which is so like the congregation I served the longest in San Mateo, California. The same beams, exactly the same pews, which the congregation just sold off, and the same tower outside with the crenellated top. It's quite lovely. It's good to be here. Some of you may remember or may have been familiar with the work of the San Francisco Chronicle columnist named John Carroll. He retired back in 2014. Some years ago, he spoke in a column about the death of Linda McCartney, musician Paul McCartney's former wife. John Carroll remarked in that column that even though Linda did everything right, she exercised, she ate a healthy vegetarian diet free from additives, she stayed away from tobacco and excessive alcohol, and so on. She died, as we all will. As Carroll put it, people who do everything right die, and people who do everything wrong die. He admits that we can do things to improve our chances of living longer, but sooner or later we will die, no matter what we do. Then Carroll writes, "We don't think about death very well. We think about avoiding it a lot, but that's foolish. It can't be avoided. Looking young doesn't help. Meditation doesn't help. Doing everything right doesn't help. I am persuaded," said Carroll, "that only gratitude helps." That phrase from that column, "only gratitude helps," stuck with me over the years. And as I let its meaning sink in, I realized how true it rings, not just in the face of the inevitability of death, but when we are faced with other pitfalls and potholes on life's bumpy road. Only gratitude helps. If we can be grateful, truly grateful for life's gifts, even in the midst of sorrow and hardship, then we have gone a long way toward a peaceful and hopeful contentment, and a long way away from the kind of discouragement, cynicism, and hopelessness that we see so much of in the world today. Many of us, I know, are still reeling from the recent national election and all the polarization and animosity that was expressed during the campaign. I would like to suggest today that in the aftermath of all of that, we might do well for our own psychological sense of well-being to bring to mind on a regular basis our sense of gratitude for those things we can celebrate in our lives. There's an old religious story about the need for gratitude. A mortal man somehow stumbles upon the barn where the mythic figure Satan stores the seeds of sin and negativity, seeds that he sows in the human heart. Well, in looking over these piles of seeds, the mortal man notices that the most numerous among them by far, the towering pile of seeds, are the seeds with the label discouragement. So he asks Satan to explain why there are so many of this particular seed. Satan boasts, "Oh, I have so many of these seeds because I can sprout seeds of discouragement anywhere. All people are prone to feel discouraged. Anywhere? Asks the man. And Satan puffs himself up and boasts some more. Sure, anywhere. But when pressed, Satan finally and sadly admits that there is one place the seeds of discouragement won't grow. The seeds of discouragement will not germinate in the heart of a truly grateful person. Well, there's always plenty around that we can be discouraged about. There's certainly trouble. There's trouble on our planet with global warming, pollution, the extinction of species. There's trouble in this country and abroad. There's hunger and homelessness that persist and persist. There continue to be tribal and religious and racial animosities among the peoples of the world. There may be financial hardships or illnesses in our own lives or the lives of those we care about. We may have difficulties in some of our relationships, or challenging personal dilemmas, or losses that knock us into grief. We may be cynical about politics, or discouraged about the effectiveness of our social action efforts. Oh yes, there is plenty of soil for Satan's seeds of discouragement to germinate in. The only antidote, according to the story, is a grateful heart. Cicero said, "A thankful heart is not only the greatest virtue, but the parent of all the other virtues." This attitude of gratitude, this thankful heart, is not necessarily gratitude for something in particular. It doesn't need to be a tallying up of our particular blessings, although there are certainly many things for which we may well be thankful. But if we are in the habit of being grateful just for the things that we lucky ones are fortunate enough to have, then what happens if we run into misfortune and lose some of it? Perhaps if next year my table is only half full, I can still be grateful that I have something. But if the following year I lose everything, even the table itself, then how thankful will I be? At what point in the descent from abundance to scarcity does gratitude for this or that specific thing turn into grumpiness? Genuine thankfulness as a basic attitude means having a thankful heart even in adversity, even in need, even in darkness. In fact, being thankful for the darkness, for being able to partake in this life, to feel its joys and sorrows, its ecstasy and its pain. It is a profound gratitude for the gift of being itself. A woman named Anita Peters, also known as Mother Bear, she's a modern Native American from the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, descendants of the tribe that was present at the so-called First Thanksgiving. She once said, "We were taught by our grandparents and by our great-grandparents to believe that the purpose of life is to be in a state of perpetual thanksgiving." The familiar story that we've learned in school about what is called the First Thanksgiving tells of the hardships the Pilgrims had to endure, and most of you know the story. Their voyage to the New World was long and difficult, and many of them died at sea. In that first hard winter, half of their number died of starvation and exposure. If it were not for the help of Native Americans, the Pilgrims might all have perished in another winter. But hard as their struggle was, they created an occasion in which gratitude was the centerpiece, an occasion which survives today in our Thanksgiving feasts. In October of 1621, the Pilgrims sat down to a sumptuous 3-day feast with local Native Americans from the Wampanoag tribe. Now, the Native Americans, and this is not usually told in the story, they weren't exactly invited. What happened is they heard gunfire in the distance, and some 90 of them came with weapons, not understanding at first that the gunfire from the Pilgrims was in celebration of the harvest. When the Wampanoag saw that the Pilgrims were celebrating, they joined them and brought 5 fresh-killed deer to the party. The Pilgrims offered prayers of thanks. They broke bread, they ate, and the Wampanoags who finally joined them, much to the surprise of the reserved Pilgrims, also danced. But the events leading up to this feast were anything but joyful. In their native land, England, these Puritan separatists were hounded because of their religious beliefs, their refusal to accept the authority of the Church of England. They were thrown in prison. They had their homes taken away. They were watched and harassed day and night. Finally, they left all behind and fled to Holland, where there was some more tolerance for their views. After a few years, they decided that to preserve their religion and way of life, they needed to set up their own community. So, financed by a small English company to which the Puritans would give part of their earnings, they and about 50 others recruited by the company set sail on the Mayflower for the New World. They expected to end up in Northern Virginia. Clearly, they were way off. They wound up 300 miles to the north at Cape Cod, and from there they made their way to Plymouth. The 2-month ride across the ocean was no pleasure cruise. In fact, the ship almost disintegrated in heavy gales, and though it was repaired, they lost their mast and rudder and had to resort to oars. In my retirement, I have taken some time to look into my own ancestry, and I've discovered that I have an ancestor who was on the Mayflower. That's nothing terribly unusual. Some 35 million or so Americans can claim that. But my ancestor fell overboard at one point and almost lost his life. It just so happened that he was spotted by a crew person on the ship and was brought back laboriously in a storm, was brought back on board. Hardship continued for the Pilgrims when they landed in the dead of winter and tried to eke out a living. They had little to eat, mostly dried meat saved from the journey, and many developed scurvy from a lack of fruits and vegetables. By the end of a very rough winter, half of them died, and most of the others were ill. Had it not been for a Native American named Tisquantum, who met the Pilgrims that spring and showed them how to plant corn and track game and what plants were safe to eat, the Pilgrims might have been wiped out altogether. The story of Tisquantum, named Squanto by the Pilgrims, also has its hardships. By the time Squanto greeted the Pilgrims that spring, saying, "Welcome, Englishmen," in perfect English, he had been across the Atlantic 4 times, and he could speak English and Spanish fluently. He was from the Patuxet tribe, a tribe that belonged to the Wampanoag Confederation of Tribes. The Patuxet lived in the Cape Cod area. When he was young, Squanto was captured and taken to England, as were other Native Americans at the time. There were curiosities that wealthy British would employ. Squanto was fairly well treated for the 7 years he lived in England, but he longed to return to his tribe. So finally, with the help of Captain John Smith, the same captain whose life was saved by Pocahontas, Squanto was sent back on a ship bound for Massachusetts. Squanto rejoined his tribe, but soon he and 27 other Patuxet braves were captured, put in chains, and brought to Spain to be sold as slaves. Fortunately, Squanto and some other Native Americans who hadn't yet been sold were taken in by some monks who opposed slavery. The monks brought Squanto and the others to their monastery, where they were nursed to health, instructed in the Christian faith, of course, and then released. Squanto made his way to England, where he met a humane merchant who sent him home again. But by this time, he returned to an empty village. His entire tribe had been wiped out by a plague. Squanto was heartbroken. He was the last Patuxet. He was taken in by the nearby Wampanoags, who were the other guests at the Thanksgiving feast. It was Squanto who had arranged a peace treaty with the Wampanoag chief, Massasoit, who would have wiped out this little band of weak pilgrims. So Squanto saved their lives twice, by showing them how to grow and find food, and by averting a massacre. The pilgrims called him a saint and believed that God had sent him to aid them. Now, in October of 1621, when the pilgrims sat down to dinner together with Squanto, Chief Massasoit, and the Wampanoag tribe, they all, think about it, they all could have had one heck of a gripe session. The pilgrims could easily have said, "Boy, last winter was a disaster. We lost half our number, and almost all the rest of us got so sick we couldn't do much. And here we are in this wilderness, and not all of the tribes around here are as friendly as you guys." Squanto certainly had his personal reasons to complain. You think that's bad? Well, not only have I lost some precious time in my life being unwillingly transported far from my homeland and sold as a slave, but I finally returned to find my whole tribe, my family, dead of some horrid disease. I'm the only one left. Even Chief Massasoit could have voiced a beef. After all, the pilgrims just came and took a part of their territory. And as history records it, the chief agreed to a treaty with the pilgrims that he didn't really understand, which led to trouble, not with the pilgrims, but with later settlers. But this assembled crowd, as the story is told, did not spend their time whining and fussing about their very real hardships. They expressed deep thanks to their respective gods, and they celebrated. This is what giving thanks for all that is our lives is about. It involves an acknowledgement that life is a gift, even if we don't get all we want. Life is a gift, even when there are hardships. In fact, adversity itself can be a gift. It is said that the pilgrims were thankful that first year because they survived. It might be more accurate to say that they survived because they were thankful. for the first good harvest, for the help of strangers, for the religious freedom they had traveled so far to enjoy among themselves. Their gratitude for the gift of life itself was abundant, and gratitude kept their hope alive. The devil had to look elsewhere that year to sow his seeds of discouragement. Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving we celebrate now, did not become a national holiday until 242 years later, when President Lincoln signed a proclamation calling for a day to be set aside for giving thanks. Like the Pilgrims, Lincoln faced a great deal of trouble. Times were especially hard when he signed the Thanksgiving Day proclamation. Tens of thousands of people had recently died at Gettysburg, and the Civil War was raging on. There was much loss and despair, but there were yet many blessings that Lincoln thought people would do well to acknowledge. Our Thanksgiving celebrations are a legacy of hope that has been handed down through the decades directly to us. A reminder to pause long enough to experience and express our gratitude for the glorious gift of our lives. You may express your gratitude to your God, to the universe, to your family and friends. You may feel it and speak it only within yourself, or utter a quiet grace at the table, or joyously proclaim it, sing it, celebrate all of it in your chosen community. As the mystic Meister Eckhart once said, if the only prayer you ever say is thank you, it will be sufficient. If in this world of trouble and cynicism and fear and despair, we can nevertheless cultivate true gratitude in our hearts, then the seeds of discouragement will not germinate. The forces of negativity will be thwarted, and our good and noble efforts to improve the world and our own lives will take on the added power of our hope, our joy, and our renewed energy. In the face of the 1,000 inevitable darknesses that will descend upon our lives and that will challenge our world, remember that only gratitude helps. As John Carroll put it, only gratitude helps. Let's now sing a song of gratitude and